And we are back with another solo variety mega show episode. I figure I haven't done one of these in a while, and yeah, it's been good so far. I've really plowed my way through the book, and I have many things that I want to talk about this week. I mean, of course, the one issue on everybody's mind that everyone's sort of tearing each other apart over still, that's been a few weeks in, is of course the tragedy unfolding in the Holy Land in the Middle East. And, so everyone wants to talk about that. And I have this one take I want to talk about. It was from a Li Fang tweet. So this episode, I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about some other things. And I want to talk about, I finally want to sort of, well, not put pen to paper, but put voice to digital sequence, to put voice to recording, the whole stock photos thing, because it came up recently, in a very sort of crazy way. But, and of course the paid version, I promised people, but I don't think I could, well, I mean, maybe I could get away with it on YouTube, but I figured that it's good enough to, bless my paid subscribers with, finally, the review of 8mm. That's going to be amazing. One of my favorite films, my favorite Nicolas Cage film, and I wanted to do a review that wasn't just the whole, like the morality play of it, but something else about the internet age, or the pre-internet, the very early, not early, but the very late pre-internet age, and of course the sort of like class issue with 8mm. So before that, if you enjoy these, if you enjoy the sound of my voice and smell, to quote that one, to quote Pastor Richards in GTA Vice City, the Pressing Issues episode where he was building a survival statue. It was like the 1980s version of like, the nuclear war is going to happen. And yeah, it's like the end times pastor is going to build a salvation statue in his image to fly to the moon or whatever. That was back when I don't have any hopes for the newest GTA game they're developing, but I always love the radio stations. Anyways, if you like this, please like, share, and subscribe. Please subscribe to patreon.com /Genre Productions, and of course all of the paid version and the free versions on Substack at Gio's Content Corner at Substack. And one day I will grace Apple Podcasts, but of course I upload everything on Anchor, Spotify, the free versions for you to download. But maybe I might do the whole like but of course like it's a problem because you have to pay a lot of money for the backlog to be uploaded. But I don't know, we'll see one day. And of course, the Digital Archipelago every Thursday, and now I'm the new co-host with Kathrine Dee, Kathrine Dee and me on the computer room. So, yeah, I'm pretty busy top of writing this book. So please give me your money or a manual typewriter, because of how busy I am, the content I produce, and of course having to write this book's been eating up all my time. I don't think I've painted a few things, but I haven't painted a single thing, nor have done a single print this year. The year just flies by. I mean, when you get older, it is true that the years sort of fly by. But I wanted to talk about one thing before we get to this Li Fang tweet about the current Palestinian conflict with that other nation in the Middle East, which I'm very uncomfortable with naming on YouTube, obviously, just for, OPSEC purposes. But I wanted to read to you a quote that I'm going to incorporate in my book that was shared by my good friend Julius. And this quote, I'm currently writing the chapter that I think will be a good draw for people, that is sort of integral to my book on neoliberal kitsch, which is the chapter on humans of flat design. And I really am, working my hardest to truly complete this vision. And my original idea was to collaborate with Eli Schiff, which one day I probably will. I'll at least have him on the show. And I was browsing the TL, and there was this quote, and I actually have the book by Sadie Plant called Zeros and Ones. And it was about, cyber feminism or cyborg feminism, or, an accelerationist approach, because you have to realize that, Sadie Plant, she was a part of the CCRU, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, with Nick Land and Mark Fisher and other people. But she's sort of like, and maybe there's something to be said about, like, women being overlooked in academia, whatever, back in the day. Not nowadays. I think that Sadie Plant's writing is pretty good. I mean, I don't agree with what she's saying here, but in terms of trying to understand the academic worldview, that is sort of like this. I'll get to this tweet that and Julius was replying to. But in terms of understanding the position of the academic worldview, I think it's very important. And I'll read you this passage from Zeros and Ones. I have that book. I also have her book on doing various substances. And so this is in reply. And Julius is quote tweeting another friend of mine who is at USU TAV, T-A-V, USU TAV, who he used to go by Pim. He's a Finnish guy. Really great poster. I remember he was a long-standing mutual. I'm talking like years and years and years. And he's a great guy. And he's replying to this person that replied to, I think it's some radfem, that is replying to my good friend Sunwound, who you should, by the way, go. He's a great filmmaker from Egypt. He's like really one of the pure posters left. He's a philosophic guy. And one day I will get him on the show. But his Twitter account is DS Wounds. So just the DS, the letters DS, then Wounds. And his YouTube account is called Sunwound. Great philosophic filmmaker. So this like radfem is talking about, well, cinema can only be right-wing because it requires a miniature fascist state to be erected in which lives are shaped and dream-formed and forms are crushed. The overarching vision of the supreme leader. And it's like, this typical academic line about, well, we were free when we were a blob. So this is what my good friend Pim, who goes by, how do I say that? Tahakate on Twitter, who is like, at USU TAV, T-A-V. So he says, but I know him as Pim, because, that was his old account, and that's, So he says, academic 130 IQ thoughts all boil down to, quote, any structure whatsoever is fascism, and when everything is an amorphous, undefined blob, it is free. According to this idea, or this ideal model of existence, was 3 billion years ago, when the planet was covered by a mat of anoxygenic microbes. Anoxygenic microbes. And I said that, this is, a basis of my chapter on humans of flat design. And just to get you salivated more for reading my book, I do this rant about Heidegger's fourfold in his book, Building Dwelling Thinking, which has the essay on the origins of the work of art and has the essay on dwelling. I compare Heidegger's fourfold and what he says about the work of art, not exactly trying to rediscover spirituality after the death of God, but more trying to open up the way for divinities and the community of mortals. And, I talk about how flat design is the sort of totalizing aesthetic of the modern world, and in terms of, the design world in the tech industry, and how it's sort of, a total aesthetic of framing. And so anyways, I basically do this like rant on Heidegger while going into as well the origins of flat design. And so yeah, like a lot of the chapters, they're about like 20 to 30 pages long, and hopefully we'll see with editing. I mean, sometimes when I go for an intellectual run, if you will, there's little connections that I find, and it's like I have to expand on them. And then I hope the chapters aren't as meandering as I think they are. So this is what my good friend and Julius said, who goes by Augurust, Augurust, but his name is M. Anj, well, E. You'll find it. So he goes, and by the way, I know, listen, he's in a war right now with this other faction of the E-Right, with, let's say, this other thought leader. And again, I don't like to comment on drama, and I may be friends with one side over, I'm friends with a lot of people on one particular side, but I have no hate towards, this other side. And, but at the same time, I think it's because I was slotted in a particular way, slotted towards the, like, post-NRX blogosphere with my writing, and so, I became, part of the Twitterati, but at the same time, anyways, I don't really like to talk about this publicly for obvious reasons, because, I don't want to offend any particular side, but I do think that, and the thing is, like, when it comes to the side that and Julius is affiliated with, I talk to people that they don't like either, right? Like, for example, I know Jeffrey Schollenberger has gone out of his way recently, and I'm friends with Jeffrey, and I always wanted him on the show, and it's what sucks, man, because, like, the faction war, in my opinion, is not. I mean, okay, here's the thing. This is the last thing I will say before I read this quote. This is not the last thing I'll say, but this is probably a definitive thing I can say that is probably true of everything. And if it pisses people off, then so be it, okay? I know that, you can go down the wholesome Chungus route and say, well, can't we all get along? That's impossible. Because if one side thinks you're a Fed and the other side thinks you're an infiltrator, and on and on and on, but also philosophically, there are irreconcilable differences between the two main factions, right? You're never going to all get along. It's impossible. And frankly, there's no incentive to move forward the way that people hashed out their disagreements more or less during 2016. I do not predict that same thing will happen next year, right? Because I could be wrong, but I'm not detecting the same level of energy or the same level of concern for the U.S. election next year. So I think that the wish that we could move beyond our differences is a hopeless one. It's a fatalistic one. Because there's so much. Sorry, I keep confusing much and many. I'm very sorry. My old man keeps correcting me on that. There are so many irreconcilable differences that the attempt to be like, let's all get along, is never going to work. And frankly, if you stick out your neck far enough, then either side or both sides will treat you with suspicion. And that's just the reality of it. That's the reality of someone that people like me, I'm in, people that, aren't afraid to talk to each other. That's just the truth, right? And that's the risk you run. So the only other option, really, and I say this to younger people, I say this to my friend Ace, who's a good friend of mine, and he's younger than me, and he enjoys talking to everybody, is that the only really thing that you could do is to create not just your own network, but to do your own thing to the point where you don't go out of your way to make yourself a target of whatever E-faction conflict there happens to be. And that's something that, to be frankly honest, I'm only going to say this once. This is what I try to do. And if I align more with one side or the other, so be it. But at the same time, I realize that there is a lot of massive limitations in any worldview, right? Because, yeah, I mean, that's just the fact of it. It's just the reality of it. I'm not a vitalist bodybuilder, okay? I mean, hey, I try to do a little bit of weightlifting here and there. I try to be, I'm trying to lose weight. But, let's face it, in terms of worldview, I'm not exactly a rightist Nietzschean. There's too much of a wholesome-chungishness to me and, my faith and all that stuff. But at the same time, it's I think that there was this one tweet I came across that said that in some ways, the Nietzschean Christian synthesis is impossible because you can always go back on the sort of Christ will always catch you in those darkest times. And I think that's not the point. That's at least what, Nietzsche was getting at. And that's true. I think, syncretism can only get you so far with anything. And as I talk about in the next chapter of this podcast with the Li Fang tweet, there's this huge debate over that one nation Middle East versus Palestine and so on and so forth, which I'll touch on. Me and Prude have touched on a little bit. But, there are irreconcilable differences. And my point is that sometimes, as much as you wish that things could be different, they're not for a reason. And, my position is that sometimes you do have to go your own way. And I'm friends with a lot of different people. And yeah, so that's what it is. And if you say that that's a cop-out, then maybe it is a cop-out. Who knows? Maybe I just want to avoid the hassle because, my real name and face is out there, and I'm not exactly the prettiest picture. I'm not exactly the most optical art critic or whatever. There is this poster like, how can you talk about aesthetics and beauty and all that when you look like that? It's I don't know. It's put it this way. Gustav Klimt was not exactly the most aesthetic looking man. But, he bedded the most beautiful of courtresses, and he created some of the most beautiful works of art in all of the world. Not just in Europe, in all of the world, right? Now, I like Gustav Klimt more for his landscapes, but, whatever. The point being is that there certainly is, there's always going to be something there. And I think that as much as you should be involved in something, to be a critic or an analysant of something, to analyze something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in it, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you can. And one of the chapters in my book is about the difference between a right-wing conception of beauty and a left-wing conception of beauty, to tease my book a little bit. And, you don't really have to be, really that is kind of leftoid logic when you think of it. Oh, you can't understand unless you're a BIPOC person. You can't analyze this social phenomena unless you're involved in it. It's funny because even, Kathrine got hit with that when she, I think it was some podcast about fandoms or something, or furries or whatever. And this, she would get these rage DMs about, you don't understand, you're an infiltrator, blah, blah, blah. It's well, it's whatever, right? It's funny because the one film on it's a mockumentary film about furries. It's called Ruckus, that me and Kathrine are going to review one day soon. I think the creator of this film, his name is Dan Hanover or something, DM'd her because she requested an interview with him, right? Because she was taken aback by the film in a good way. And he's I think it's he or whatever. I don't want to misgender, but this person is oh, you're too alt-right. I'm not going to associate with you. I had this, it's funny, when I was on BTR, I remember when I was on Follow the Rules, rather, we had that furry stream. And this one furry rage quit halfway through and said, you're using our cloud and blah, 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 and you're alt-right and whatever. But yeah, my general point is that sometimes you just have to create your own thing. You have to be at peace with the friends that you have. And even if your friends are not friends of other people, it's it's really stupid. It's unavoidable. And, there's some things that even Jeffrey Schellenberger said about the recent, the thing with BAP. It's yeah, he was being uncharitable, and I don't co-sign those uncharitable tweets. But, because it's he's smart enough to know what he's doing, right? And listen, Jeffrey, I'm not calling you out. I'm good friends with Jeffrey. I've been on his show, and we did a great podcast at Francis E. Deck. and I really admire his work. It's just that, like, come on, you know what's going to happen, right? You're poking, to quote Hank Hill, you're teasing the gorilla in the monkey's house, right? And as opposed, and for the other side as well, it's like sometimes you see things that are bait, and I try to avoid when people are beefing, but it's like, it is what it is, right? But there are very serious accusations that people level at each other that by definition cannot be reconciled with some kumbaya moment of like, well, we have to all get along because we're all under siege by the same enemies and so forth. That's as much as I like to be a wholesome chungus or whatever, you have to think realistically about these things. But anyways, I've ranted for far too long. Finally, the Sadie Plant quote that I think is integral to understanding the thought of the current iteration of the political left on a global scale, certainly the aesthetics of them, which is what I'm writing about in my book. So here it is. So, and Julius posted this, and I shall read it in full. And for the sake of reference, this is the very first chapter. It's a preamble in the first chapter to Sadie Plant's book, Zeros and Ones, which I do highly recommend reading. It is a good piece. It is a good piece of academic feminist theory selling. It's really a cut above most. But this first point really does hammer home what the ethos of a lot of leftist thinking currently is. So she says, "Those were the days when we were all at sea. It seemed like yesterday to me. Species, X, race, class. In those days, none of this meant anything at all. No parents, no children, just ourselves. Strings of inseparable sisters, warm and wet, indistinguishable from one and the other. Gloriously indiscriminate, promiscuous and fixed. No generations, no future, no past, no separation. An endless and geographic plane of micromeshing, pulsing quanta. Limbless webs of interacting blendings, leakings, mergings, weavings through ourselves, running rings around each other, headless, needless, aimless, careless, thoughtless, amok. Folds and folds and foldings, playing and multiplying, placating and replicating. We had no definition, no meaning, no names, no way of telling each other apart. We were whatever we were up to at the time. Free exchanges, microprocesses, finely tuned, polymorphous, and polymorphous perversity is, of course, another theme of Humans of Flat Design, by the way. The Freudian definition. Polymorphous transfers without regard for borders and boundaries. Whoa. We were one world gray goo. We were one world gray goo. She doesn't say that, but that's, my addition. There was nothing to hang on to, nothing to be grasped, nothing to protect or to be protected from. Insides and outsides did not count. Because the one is the same as the outside, is the same as the inside. And, Deleuze talks about this with the rhizome. Deleuze and Guattari talk about this with the rhizome. And how they called it the enfolding of the outside and vice versa. And of course, in a Foucauldian sense, you could relate this to biopower, but I talk about this in my book. There was nothing to hang on to, nothing to be grasped, nothing to be protected and protected from, and no outsides or insides insides did not count. We gave no thought to any such things. We gave no thought to anything at all. Everything was there for the taking then. We paid no attention. It was all for free. It had been this way for tens, thousands, millions, and billions of what were later defined as years. If we had thought about it, we would have said it would go on forever. This fluent and fluid world. And then something occurred to us. The climate changed. We couldn't breathe. It grew terribly cold. Far too cold for us. Everything we touched was poisonous. Noxious gases and like Francie Deck. The noxious gaseous envelope. You remember? Noxious gases and thin toxic airs flooded our ocean zone. Some said we had brought it on ourselves. that all our activity had backfired, that we had destroyed our environment by accident that we had provoked. There was rumors of betrayal and sabotage. I guess, Cain redacting Abel in the garden, right? Well, they were in the garden, but were they in the garden? I forget. There were rumors of betrayal and sabotage, whispers of alien invasion, and mutant beings from another ship. Again, this is very Francis E. Deck. Only a few of us survived the break. Conditions were so terrible that many of those who did not pull through wished they had been redacted. We mutated to such an extent that we were unrecognizable to ourselves, banding together in units of a kind which, like everything, has been unthinkable before. So, in other words, you differentiated, and then you had to form tribal groups. So this is like the monolith moment in, 2001: A Space Odyssey. We found ourselves working as slave components of systems whose scales and complexities we could not comprehend. We were who were their proxies? Were they our proxies? Either way, we became components of our own imprisonment. To all intents and purposes, we were disappeared, erased. And Julius said Sadie Plant's book on cyberfeminism from 1990s opens with this preamble describing exactly that. The primordial soup of formless organic matter as a sort of paradise lost through the great oxidation event which imposed fascistic structures on the undifferentiated beings. And then he quotes an endless geographic plane of micromeshing, pulsating quanta, limitless webs of interacting blendings, linkagings, linkings, mergings, weavings, and of course he puts pictures of favelas going sky high. It's like the one in Brazil, in Rio. You have the Rocinhos favela where it's like a spiral going down the mountain. It's like he puts that photo there, and it's it's funny because it's like the first oxidation event of the separation of cells of species that later, if you believe in evolution, later evolved into the human form. That was fascism. It's like, that's the most left-wing person ever. It's like that one Carlsbad tweet. I hope Carlsbad comes back. He said the one guy said to him, the snake in the garden was, I can't say it for YouTube, but it starts with a Z. The snake in the garden was that. And he said, you are the most right-wing man in existence. It's like, the differentiation of amoeba. That was the first fall into fascism. Sadie Plant's the most left-wing woman in the world. Oh, boy. Oh, I'm having too much fun with this. This is why I love solo variety mega shows, because I get to run wild, right? But I like that Carlsbad reference because he was trying to, here's a little bit of background. So, he was trying to see, like, in his conceptual history framework, that you can't just create a massive line through of all history. And this is why he criticizes, people that are into Spangler a lot, or he did. And, because people would say that, well, this is the first instance of subversion, the right-wing distinction in, the court of France during the revolution, people that sat on the right side who were, pro-monarchy or pro-restorationist or whatever. And he's saying that you can't just have this, like, clean line throughout history to say that if you keep going back far enough, because that's what will happen. It'll be like a weird form of absurdio ad reductum of, like, this is the first instance of the distinction. This is the first instance of, like, this is the first instance of the collapse into modernity is the French Revolution. No, it's the Protestant Reformation. No, it's the Glorious War. No, it's this and that. It's like, no, it keeps going back further. So it's funny how in a weird form of postmodern, how should I say it? Postmodern cyborg theory and so forth, that all originally stems from the Rousseauian assumption of nature, which is contra Hobbes. Well, I mean, Hobbes is even to an extent subversive in some ways. But, it's funny because you could hate Hobbes from, like, a far-right perspective or a libertarian perspective. But, it's funny because the first instance of left-wing, the first instance of fascistic right-wing subversion of this originary state of total freedom and lack of identity and lack of desire into an undifferentiated mass amoeba, into one singular organism without distinction or name. That first instance of quote unquote fascism or hierarchy, because differentiation also implies hierarchy, is the splitting of the amoeba, the splitting of the protoplasm and becoming differentiated cellular organisms that, the theory goes, turns into human evolution. So, I think it's like a weird inversion of the Nigel Carlsbad meme of the right wing being obsessed with what is the first act of subversion that led into modernity, that led into like the, global G slur disco. It's like this is the left wing version. What was the first act of fascism that led to hierarchy and patriarchy and distinction of title and rank, or what Nietzsche called order and rank? So yeah, but I find this worldview quite funny. There is something to be said about the supreme honesty of something like that. I forget what poster it was. I think it was it was Enzo. Yeah, it was Enzo that said, this type of philosophic thinking, or at least in politics, this type of worldview building that is in some ways innovative or reveals an unintentional truth, like that sort of left us behind. And Sadie Plant being a particular type of intellectual, really seals the deal in this regard. And that's true. Like there is a huge lack of innovative thinking, but I think like in some odd ways there is a supreme honesty to that passage, because when you really don't have, or rather, when one's worldview prohibits you from falling back upon most structures that give one meaning. And, Sadie Plant, I gotta stop saying, Sadie Plant, very aware of the sort of trends in philosophy in the late 20th and now 21st century. And of course, this is like, after the death of God and so forth. I think that in some ways there's a supreme honesty with most of the ideological projects of the political left pulls towards this form of supreme abstraction of all things. And it's a way of admitting that, yes, we were like, in some ways it's like a return to the supreme mother of undifferentiation. That there was no conception, not just of the individual, but there was an individual, but they're individual that is not fundamentally different than anybody else. And there's no awareness of not just hierarchy and order and rank, but, of a godhead, of nature as such. I mean, yes, there is a form of divinity, but of course, in the minds of the contemporary left, there is a sort of what I call the atheistic turn. You have this Rousseauianism taken to its logical conclusion. Of course, Rousseau, he bridges things towards, well, the divine, how shall I say it? The divine instantiates a certain form of life that the machinations of human society prevents us from living in, right? The divine has a certain path for us. Rousseau talks about this. And the general will is a way of at least getting some of that mana in the material realm in order to regulate human society, but yet maximize freedom. The general will is a very complicated concept in Rousseau. I remember I had this TA once when I was an undergrad that said I explained it quite well. I should dig up this paper. The general will being, in some ways, almost like a cosmic principle of ordering. And yeah, Rousseau complicates it with like, well, there's enforces the general will, and there, forcing you to be free is a misunderstood phrase, or it's a complicated phrase, in that freedom is forced in the sense that slavery or bondage or whatever is an aberration of a certain model of society and social ordering. It's been years since I really researched this, but essentially the general will, is almost like a cosmic principle. It's almost like Mahat or Mat, how do you pronounce it, in Egyptian lore. It's almost like a nomos that reaches into a metaphysical principle in some ways. And of course, we have the secularization of Rousseau with the French Revolution, and then later with other political theories. I mean, of course, they try to link Marx with Rousseau. But what's interesting here is that this is the ultimate end point of that logic. That as an undifferentiated husk, as a single-celled organism that just propagates, and there is no fundamental distinction between an inner life or an outer life. It is the simplest form of a very complicated process of life. That is ultimately what I would call like the modern, progressive liberal worldview really pulls towards. And people could say that Marxism is kind of like that, but I mean, yeah, to an extent. But it's really like, we've moved beyond Marxism, and we've even moved beyond liberalism as such. I mean, we still have a form of it, but it's not a form of liberalism that was bred out of the European mind. And people say that it's communism, and in some respects, it is communist, but then we don't want to tread old ground of demonizing quote-unquote collectivism, like people that are like, normie cons or whatever. That's sort of your, Fox News, Jordan Peterson view of things. And it's funny because someone said this in reply to Julius, in a reply that I think it was Dugan that said, and again, there's a lot of, Dugan has been posting a lot of coal lately. Dugan's been posting a lot of cringe. A lot of third worldist cringe. But he said something along the lines, and this is, of course, I believe from not the Fourth Political Theory, but one of his other more philosophic books, that there's nothing as old as time itself than postmodernism. In the sense that there is a supreme abstraction of life to the point of Hesiates being rendered obsolete. And in a way that, like, we like to think that the breaking down of order and entropy is a recent thing. This is like sort of the normicon classical liberal view of it. But in reality, these things are as old as time itself, right? Like even Horkheimer and Adorno said, mythos and reason was always commingled, right? There's always that capacity for reason in mythos. For example, Odysseus blinding the Cyclops, and you had to reveal your name to the gods. So I'm fuzzy in the details, but essentially Odysseus, he tricks the Cyclops. The Cyclops goes back to the Titans, and I believe it was the Titans, or it could have been the other gods. And they asked him, who blinded you? And he said, nobody, because the name that Odysseus gave is I'm nobody, right? And that's like an example. There's another example, of course, with Hermes tricking, I believe he turned some goddess into a cattle or something. I forget the details. I was talking about this with somebody recently. And it's like, yeah, and Hermes being like the embodiment of logos or reason or whatever you want to call it, wisdom, insight. There's always that implication of chaos through reason capacity within a closed mythological system that then opens up, and then myth sort of comes through the back door again, then reason breaks it down. It's like this is an eternal process. That was the point of Horkheimer and Adorno in the Dialectic of Enlightenment. So in a way, postmodern thinking is like this as well. That we can, we don't have the grand projects of history anymore, but we can sort of have a form of like mass communal collectivism and the breaking down and the abstraction of human form into either hyper individualism or hyper communitarian oneness, the global, which is essentially what the global great goo is this weird combination of individualism, extreme forms of individualism met with extreme forms of conformity and the destruction of differentiation or difference itself. Because difference implies history, difference implies uniqueness, difference implies hierarchy, because you can't have hierarchy without difference. Difference implies multiplicity of nation, of biospirit, of anything, right? So that's basically the problem with difference itself. So what happens when you have a system that pulls towards both extreme entropy and extreme feats of equality? Well, you have to revert back to the point of a more primitive form of life organism. What is the ultimate form of primitive life organism? To become like a single cell. It's like, I believe, I forget which African country it is. It may be Kenya, it may be like in the Congo, where they have this horrific prison where basically in these like huge pits or these cells, there's like, hundreds of men at a time. And the only way they can live is to operate as if they are a single-celled organism. By the way that they have to, like, one man has to feed the other man. And then you have to, like, circle around to go to, like, to do, I don't want to describe it for YouTube, but, to do your business. It's like, I remember watching this in some nature documentary many years ago. Or I believe it wasn't that long, it was a YouTube video. And it's like humanity reverting back to the utter stages of animal and animalism, but one that also has, by necessity, a form of coherent thinking. And I believe if one person strays from this collective agreement for survival, they are quickly overtaken by the whole mass. And it's like, the Borg hive humanity. I have to look up this prison. Let me look it up for a minute. It may have been the Gitamara prison in Rwanda, I'm thinking of. But I remember, like, these were outdoor cells, and by necessity, they have to revert back to a more primitive form of human, not even human nature, but of nature in general. And they had to also, in a strange way, operate as a collective organism, just by the sheer necessity of survival. Anyways, I think that it's really strange how this becomes the form of the end point of the ideology that has really captured the world. And I think that all of us in any dissident space has this thing about trying to understand, okay, how is it that this particular manifestation of liberalism evolved and developed and captured the world and has a monopoly on all discourse, on all violence, on all affairs, and that really there can be no alternative rival ideology unless unless the regime finds a need for a temporary and fugitive version of a little Potemkin village, Disneyland Gladio operation version of rival ideology for a very specific purpose. And I've, gone through this on the show. So I think it's very interesting how, and there's, numerous reasons as to why this particular ideology has dominated the world. But I think that in some ways it's, it's unavoidable. Not in this, and I don't want a black pill. It's not totally unavoidable. But I think that the choices elites and even human populations made in the Western world in the 20th, in the 19th and 20th century especially, and I think that certain predominant trends of different knowledges and industries and the way that politics evolved with them, I think that, some form of what we're living through nowadays is in some ways inevitable, but not necessarily totally anti-fragile. It can be overcome. Eventually, like all things, it will come to pass. Like all arrangements and societies and civilizations. But we never know. I mean, the regime could be around for a very long time. And, our children's children might not even get a say in how the future is going to shape up. But we'll see what happens. So for now, let's have a little break by Philip Daniel. Let's play some tunes, and we'll come back with some other. And we are back. I hope you enjoyed. That was, I'm sure whatever I pick is going to be very interesting. And of course, all of Philip Daniel's links are in the description, including his Patreon and the particular composition of this episode. So I had this tweet that did some numbers, and it was, I simply said that the Redditification of metal is complete, of metal music. And it's very sad, and there's a lot of reasons why nerds and, people that are just obnoxious and annoying, why they're attracted to ostensibly or what used to be coded as quote-unquote masculine things like metal, professional wrestling, video games. But metal in particular has been hit pretty hard. I mean, you could say that wrestling always had a theater kid element. I remember this one tweet that said, well, wrestling was always queer culture. And it's like, oh my God, these people, man, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, yeah, you could make some academic argument, of course. But I think that the way they mean it, is like, their G-slur theater kid worldview was always amenable to professional wrestling. The professional wrestling fan of old was quite different. But anyways, this, and a lot of other people were dunking on it, was, and apparently this band, I believe it's called Frozen Soul, very original name, I'm not going to bash them. I don't know if their music is good or not. I haven't listened to them, right? But apparently this band actually told these people to do this. There was a video of a circle pit. And for those who don't know, back in the day, listen, kids, okay? Here's an old head to tell you what it used to be like. Mosh pits used to actually be moshing. It used to actually be violent, and you were shoved, and sometimes you were, more than shoved. And it was sort of like a thing that you did to release aggression. And of course, people, by the time us millennials came along, people were good sports about it and they would pick you up if you fell down. But back in the day, man, especially with certain death metal bands, you could get trampled on. Like it was intense, right? And sometimes you would even have people encouraging the violence. Performers, I mean, Dillinger Escape Plan used to do that, right? Like he used, Greg Puciato used to like kick people in the head and used to like throw things out from the stage, and he'd have like this show box that he'd stand on. He'd like throw it out, and it would just beam somebody. There was that one where there was really crazy where Dillinger was playing in a mall outside of the Barnes and Noble. Was it an HMV or a Barnes and I think it was like a Barnes and Noble. And he like hydroplaned across the crowd. I believe it was they were playing Sugar Coated Sour. And he like hydroplaned across the crowd. He just like jumped as far as he could until like on top of people's heads, right? This was like real metal back in the day. And nowadays, okay, because us millennials, it was like, oh, you gotta pick them up when they fall down. And like, if you find like a weaker person or a woman or whatever, it's like, don't go out of your way to just like destroy them. And there would always be like a fat, like sweaty guy without his shirt on. I never took my shirt off, okay? I was never that fat guy in the pit. I was a fat guy in the pit, but I never took my shirt off. There's this one guy that did it. He was high out of his mind. I believe I was seeing, I want to say Meshuggah. Or it may have been a Summer Slaughter tour. No, I think it was Meshuggah. I saw Meshuggah like 3 times with my friends. And it was one of the times. Anyways. Nowadays, instead of going in a circle pit where they're going around the circle, they're, bashing up against each other and you're pushing people. And you know what they do? They just walk around the circle. They barely touch each other. It's like, what is this? Is this what Zoomers... I sound like a crotchety old man. Is this what, back in my day, circle pits were actually violent? Is that what Zoomers do when they go to metal concerts now? The few Zoomers that are still into metal? My God. Anyways, there was a group of people in the middle of this circle pit, and I promise you, this is going to have some theory cell content. Don't worry about it, right? This is the content minded. You know the score, hopefully. If you don't know the score, then you're about to get theory celled. Anyways, there's this group of people that were playing Magic the Gathering in the middle of the pit, and people weren't kicking them, and they said they played like 3 hands or 3 rounds. I don't know. My good friend B-Dubs on Twitter, who I knew him for a long time, he's like these Gen X dads who like was an OG not Magic the Gathering. He's an OG like D&D player, and I think he does play Magic. But I don't know how Magic the Gathering exactly works with the cards and all that. Did you see the Canadianese of my accent? My GF always loves detecting it too, because she's an American. When I say card, out. When I say card, the car. So, anyways, that'll get really annoying if I bring your awareness towards it. But anyways, they were playing Magic the Gathering in the middle of the circle pit. And there's something like very like Reddit and TikTok and like this has to be a viral moment where we're doing a bit and it's kooky and it's fun. And then when you criticize it, it's like, well, let people enjoy things. I hate this, man. I hate this. I hate. Because it's like, okay, here's why I hate this. And someone said it the best. I believe it was, I forget his exact handle, but it was someone that said, and I retweeted it. It's on my timeline. They said, man, I hate that all of life is reduced to just doing a bit now in public, right? And a lot of people were saying very aptly, they were saying, you don't just enjoy things, you have to have this other layer of I'm doing a bit to enjoy things. You can't just have that collective experience. It's very hipsterish type of thing. And I think, and I don't fault Zoomers for this. I swear, okay, as much as I think that the millennial created the modern version of this, especially with the social media age, and so therefore I'm not like I'm not totally exempting Zoomers because they've taken it to another degree. But really, the origins of this, and my good friend Lady Astor could talk about this on Twitter, her being a core Gen Xer, and her going to many, many concerts and many, many nightclubs and all of this, is that even before the internet was commonplace, this sort of hipsterish behavior kind of started with Gen X, where it's this like, I remember Schwab did a space once where he was talking about a certain group of people that I'm not going to name because I'm cool with a lot of them on right-wing Twitter. And he's like, a lot of this stuff on the TL, it's like having a group chat on the TL. It's very hipsterish behavior. It's like when you go into a cafe and a hipster, like a guy brings his acoustic guitar, his ukulele, and it's like, they're obnoxious and they have their little in jokes and, they're making noise and it's very much this hipsterish behavior. I remember Schwab said of like basically having a group chat on the timeline. And I think it's, a lot of people think this way. In real life, when there is something to be witnessed, you can only have this presence or this full presence if you're doing something else that is essentially a bit. You remember, and a good follower of mine, I'll find the video because I think it was brilliant. And what's funny is that a guy DM'd me who follows me and says that he like knows this girl in real life. There's this TikTok girl, I forget her name, but she looks kind of like something like Lebanese or French or something. She's got a very particular look, and people were like, "Oh, she's mid," and she's just a beautiful looking young woman. And she had this she nailed, and I think she's probably frog adjacent if she's meeting in real life with a follower of mine. She probably knows about she probably knows something. Where, it's so crazy. I never forget this. And I think it's like she's mocking the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, the hipster Manic Pixie art ho dream girl that millennials are obsessed with. Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Paper Towns, which, I wrote that review many moons ago, shredding it apart, where she's like, just do the bit. Nothing's more important than the bit. I know that nobody gets it right now, but that's the bit, right? And the way she like perked her face was like a perfect, like you could see like Cara Delevingne doing that, right, in a movie. Like, nobody gets it at this point, but that's the bit, right? And the way she like winks. Oh my God, perfect distillation of the Zooey Deschanel, Cara Delevingne, Manic Pixie Dream Girl for the millennial and the Zoomer, right? The older Zoomer, Zennial. I really like that was crazy. At the end, she's like, "Nothing in life matters more than the bit." Right? That's millennial and that's Zoomer to the core. Everything in life has to be a bit. Because everybody is a media-ized subject. You can't just have, okay, I've been to quite a few concerts in my time. I haven't been to many concerts, especially after the CVidian era. I will once, when I lose some more weight, I'll probably go to some more concerts. Last concert I went to, I saw, I think this was like right before the Chinese delicacy hit. I saw the Tea Party. And it was the 20th anniversary of one of my favorite albums ever, Transmission. And they played the whole album through. And it was amazing. Even though, like, there was this break in between. And Jeff Martin did this, like, thing about, I hate when they do the PSAs, right? About how Trump hates women or whatever. I believe this was, like, either 2018, 2019. Anyways, Trump hates women because, like, of course, like the Canadian. Does he live in Canada again? I believe he lived in Australia for quite a while, which a lot of Leafs actually live in Australia. But anyways, I've been to quite a few metal concerts in my day, and I feel so old saying that. And it's funny because when you go to a concert, I remember the best concert I ever went to. And the reason I say this, it was the best, is because it's my favorite band. The best concert I ever went to was Nevermore. And I forget the openers. I forget. But I went to see Nevermore. This was when they were touring for their last album, The Obsidian Conspiracy, before they broke up. And then, of course, World Dane met his, untimely passing. And I remember, like, I was in the front, and, like, World Dane, he, like, grabbed my hand, and it was incredible, right? It was incredible. I remember, like, thinking about the nature of a concert, especially, with metal music, is that it's supposed to be a jarring and an awakening of the senses, and it's supposed to be a collective experience to where you do see people doing different forms of behavior, but in those moments, especially when they're playing, the most popular songs, the ones that everyone identifies with, the ones that people have a sing along to, it very much is sort of a collective unconscious awakening of some form of energy that takes over, and it very much is the experience. And it's funny because it's something. It's funny. I always have this when I used to drive to Toronto with my friends. I always used to have this like same argument with my mother, who'd be like, "Why do you have to go to the concert? I hate concerts because like I'd rather just listen to the recording." And I go, "Well, you don't understand. The concert is the experience." And she goes, "No way a concert can be better. Like no way live music could be better than the recording." And I'm like, "I don't know about that." It's not true. It's not true. It's a different energy, because musicians, if they're creative enough, and if they don't just like phone it in every night, they will switch certain things. They will have certain intricacies of the way they play. And I mean, of course, this isn't just the reality of jazz, but other genres, even metal. There's bands that will play different parts. There's even within rock music that was more or less directly inspired by jazz, such as in progressive rock or in fusion. You have bands like King Crimson who were dealing with the very structure orientated, hit it right every single night ethos of rock music, or pop music in general. Pop as in music that wants to be popular. This is the Chris Ott definition of pop music. Not as like, what we know colloquially as pop music. And it's like, that ethos of like getting it right, almost like the recording every single night, as opposed to the jazz ethos of playing standards but doing them in your own way. There's places of innovation and compositions that are improvised. It very much is like they're quote unquote calling it in the ring, right? You don't play. Sometimes you play with a set band, but then bandmates change, or you collaborate with different people, and a lot of times it becomes about the individual musician themselves rather than the group, the band. I mean, there's always jazz bands. There's like, yeah, of course, but then you have people that blend the two ethoses together, like King Crimson, right? Now, Robert Fripp would consciously design songs as to have parts in the middle of them to when they're playing live, they can improvise. They can have a collaborative, they can go into like a collaborative vibe through improvisation, given the root structure of that song, rather than the whole thing either being improvised through a standard, doing their own version of it. Whereas like in rock music and pop music, there is this emphasis on repeatability, but also individuality. Every song has to be different. Every song is unique to that artist. There is no such thing as like rock standards. Now, you say that like, I mean, certain songs in rock and metal will be covered over and over again, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of bands, for example, that will cover, like metal bands that will do a heavier version of something. I quite like that. For example, what would be a good example? I liked it when, I'm trying to think of an example. I know Sepultura, when they covered Bullet for the Blue Sky, that was a great one. Because I'm not a fan of U2. I hate U2. Sorry if I'm offending you if I said I hate U2. but that song was, because people, they complain because, oh, what about Mexico Vieira, but I think that Derek Green's an all right singer, and there's other ones where they'll cover they'll make a different version of an already heavy song but do it in their own style. Like my favorite, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of their songs, although I mean when Mitch Lucker was still around, before his very stupid, untimely death. Sunset Silence, I don't think I should say the name on YouTube. They did a great cover of Engine Number 9 by Deftones. I was like, sometimes I like that better than the original because of the way it was more violent and it was more of that like deathcore type of style. But anyways, and this is all distraction. So this is very like all of life having to be a bit that you perform as a media eye subject to get updates on Reddit and on Reddit and on TikTok. It's like that's a very strange form of engagement that breaks you free of the experience that you ostensibly want to go there for, which is to have a collective enjoyment of a particular band or a series of bands, depending on the package, right? The opening act and so forth. And you're breaking yourself off. You're doing this very obnoxious, very hipsterish behavior, and you're ruining the experiences of people. And of course, the Redditor would be like, let people enjoy things. All those other people, they didn't seem to mind because they were going around them. Well, that's a condemnation of the modern metal and fan. That's a condemnation of the I sound like an old head, but that's a condemnation of what that used to stand for. If even when I was younger, if someone were to do that, they would have been done. They would have been dealt with. You know what I mean? Like it just wouldn't have taken place. And I think that as much as like there's a lot of LARPiness that I don't exactly enjoy, that I never enjoyed with metal. I don't like to call myself metal because of like nowadays how there's like this postmodern pastiche of like, well, we're going to LARP as older bands, or we're going to like LARP as a meme genre where we have like a unique thing, and that's our bit, right? That's a bit. We're a band about pirates. We're a band about Ned Flanders. We're a band about I shouldn't say Municipal Waste had some good songs. But like, we're a band about this. We're a band about this super niche thing, and we're creating our own genre. We're a band about Vikings. And it's like, listen, I'm not offending anyone who listens to Amon Amarth. I personally never liked a lot of the like verging into power metal stuff. I never quite enjoyed. I mean, some of that stuff is good, but I don't know. Like, there's certain bands where there's even certain bands that sound pretty stock, but because they have this like memeified, like postmodern hipster genre attached to them, they're like, well, we're different because we have an aesthetic and we have a bit, we have a meme bit that we do, and it's this very hipsterish, postmodern type of like media eye subject type of thing, where it's like I'm taking my bit into public, and it's like kooky. And even though it's totally probably ruining the experiences of other people because you're there for a purpose. You're not there to like express yourself. I'm turning this thing that has a unique purpose as a collective experience, and I'm basically individualizing it to my own whim by doing this bit in public. It's like, it's funny, haha, do the bit. Nobody gets it at this point, but that's the bit, right? Like you keep doing the bit, and the bit will eventually get you clicks and updates. So yeah, there's certainly an element of sort of weird internet age postmodern performativity going on. And I think that you can't, like this is the problem, right? Is that the ethos of like let people enjoy things has really distorted our perception of purpose and purposeful behavior in the public space, the public space. Oh God, I mean, I'm not a big fan of JF. He blocked me a long time ago. But, I don't know. Like, the rumors about Mama JF are wild, man. I don't even want to go into that speculation. But I think, like, when two eccentric people get together, like, weird things happen that may look suspicious. But the fact that he is calm about it, anyways, that's just distraction. So my point being is that there is a reason why we engage in certain forms of ritual and community, and why we are there. Because you got to realize a concert is not just entertainment, especially a metal concert, right? Maybe I'm just reifying it as like, someone who grew up loving, heavy metal, death metal. I was always a big fan of tech death, right? I saw the face. I think I told the story in the show where I saw the Faceless twice. Once was at a local festival. All these bands from Southern California came down, and off of Sumerian Records, of course. And I remember I saw Michael Keane, the Keane Machine, and I talked. I said, "Oh, I'm a big fan. By the way, I'm a big fan of David Icke too," because the concept album Planetary Duality was, I believe, Michael Keane was reading the David Icke book Children of the Matrix. And then I remember when I went to Summer Slaughter a year later, I was in the front row and he was setting up, and I'm like, "Keane, you remember me? Remember we talked about David Icke?" And he looks over, he's like, "Oh, you again." It's funny because my good friend Matthew Stout actually interacted with him because he was the merch guy for Monuments. For those who don't know, Matthew the Stout, he actually did the album art for, I believe, the first two Monuments albums. Anyways, so yeah, the purpose of a concert is a community thing. It's to get enveloped by a force of energy. And ultimately, it is an expression of a weird form of ritual that has long been taken from us, or ritualism becoming very complicated in our world. Byung-Chul Han has a great book on it called The Disappearance of Rituals. I believe Prude, if you sign up for his Subscribe Star, he does a book club reading of The Disappearance of Rituals. Or it's like a Patreon, sorry, not Patreon, Subscribe Star only review. Go check that out. But anyways, you have this ritual, but at the same time you have this like weird behavior where you have to like, you willingly engage in the ritual, but you also have to make it more interesting. So you find ways to, in a very bombastic and public manner, plug out of the ritual and disengage from it. And also ruining the experience of other people around you, or making it quirky and funny. And, I know I sound like some metal purist elitist being like, you're defending the sanctity of metal, but there is a sanctity, I think, to a concert going experience, especially for a niche genre of music that not everybody gets. And yeah, it's become more Redditified now, and it's become more like soy lineal, same like professional wrestling, by the way. And video games and comic books. But, I mean, video games will always have, I think, a reactionary contingent. Professional wrestling in the Western world, less so. Because professional wrestling crosses over into all sorts of queer culture and comedy and performativity and theater kid stuff. And a lot of theater kids are wrestlers now. So, yeah, take for it what you will. It's blackpilling, but what are you going to do? That's just the nature of it. But metal, I think, it's still for people that, let's face it, metal is very multicultural, but predominantly in North America, at least, and in Europe, predominantly white audience, of course. And a lot of it does have to do with people that appreciate music that is more complex, despite, what people may think of it stereotypically as the noise and the growling and so forth. There is an incredible amount of complexity in even a very average, more technically competent metal band, right? Let alone getting to bands that people do consider quite ridiculous because of the themes and the music and the inaudible growling. Bands like, Dying Fetus or Cryptopsy, like those are, the amount of musical complexity is almost approaching the level of jazz in terms of its ability to string together very nuanced and very complex parts, but at incredible speeds, with incredible distortion, and at the speed of light practically. Anyways, So, metal will always attract a certain contingent of nerds, put it that way. The way that jazz attracts a certain contingent of nerds. So I think that when it comes to this type of behavior, it is a sign of, a very alarming trend in the sense that, you can't really enjoy anything or allow yourself to be subsumed in a mass, or at least appreciate that experience of being a part of a form of ritual and communal longing and so forth. Now you have to do this special, interesting, like limited hangout of this thing. You know what I mean? In order to find any meaning in it. But the difference is that it's not a true limited hangout, because that would imply a form of in-group signaling. Now it's like a pure spectacle performance. But I've been going on a long time about this like stupid trend, and it's just a stupid video. And let me get to finally this Li Fang tweet and the whole issue with the current conflict. Now, it's funny because there was this tweet by Matt Gaetz, and, recently Matt Gaetz has been stacking some, mediocre, bare minimum amount of W's with this whole, like, speaker thing where they wanted this neocon. And he's like, no, you're just like a lackey and you're, being paid off. But then he tweets this thing about like, well, this certain nation in the Middle East, we have a history with them for 4,000 years, a typical American Protestant, I'm not bashing American Protestants. I mean, like, the evangelical obsession with this one particular nation in the Middle East, which I don't want to name too explicitly on YouTube. But, and the current thing, right? And he goes about, like, whereas, like, Ukraine, there used to be a Soviet satellite state, even though, like, majority of them are Orthodox Christians. But, of course, Orthodox Christians are not real Christians, according to the Republican Party and the evangelicals, of course. Same with the Christians in the Middle East. They're not real Christians because of whatever, right? They're not coded aesthetically as Christians to them. So, therefore, it's because our greatest ally is bombing them, then, oh, well, who cares, right? They're just like, well, I guess they're all guilty because of Hamas, the organization that one nation in the Middle East is fighting in Gaza. HAMA. Let's, I don't know how the Duran gets monetized. They just say things freely, but I'm paranoid, as you know. I can just say it, Hamas, okay? Yeah. It's quite funny, right? Because now Matt Gaetz is concerned with the funding. Now they're like, well, I guess we have to go after Russia. And I guess, like, there's people that have a vested interest for whatever reason, not to get too into specifics of why they hate Russia so intensely. It's like, oh, but that's, but this is our greatest ally. We've got to do it right now, right? So anyways, and generally the discourse on the E-right has been atrocious as always, because like all things, there is a middle in between this, okay? As I've said before in the show multiple times, and I've said this, and it's funny because Shuan Head, she like tweeted this today, although she was dunking on right-wingers, but there is a truth to it about like how all of the work the E-right did was immediately erased because now it's like the neocon priors of us like being like normie cons, like growing up when we were like, teenagers in suburbia or like older teenagers, listening to Fox News or whatever, or talk radio. I mean, I read the National Post. I watched the Michael Corrin show. So, of course, there's neocon priors, right? But that being said, these migrants are not your friends either, right? Like, there was this comic I saw, and of course the left, they can never create their own memes. It was a gamer head, yes, a Nordic gamer head, and he's like has the Palestinian flag, and it's a soy jack who's got the Austrian painter uniform, and he's like, oh, you've awakened to these people, the ones I'm not gonna say, and it's like typical every single meme, it's like cuteness and aggression by leftoids, by impossible women or beyond women. The meme is always, here's a quote unquote phobe, and I'm going to violently dispatch them. Right? That's the meme. That's the joke. Punchline, bottom text. Right? the text, the motivational. I love when they still include bottom text. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but anyways, that's the meme, right? Just commit acts of aggression against, acts of violence against people that disagree with you, and so it's like bash the fash and all this like LARPy nonsense by people that, let's face it, are and I'm not the perfect specimen of physicality either, but come on, right? Come on. So it's like, then of course the next frame is the Nordic Gamer head. They don't even change it to be like an edit of someone who's aesthetically towards the contemporary cultural left. But then of course he's like, bashing him with a baseball bat. And it's just, it's an illustration of the fact that, there is a fundamental disconnect, I feel, in terms of relationships between exoticism or Orientalism and both the left and the right, right? Now, the fact is that people in these groups in both Lebanon and in Palestine, Gaza, right? Their political beliefs are probably more akin to the evil Austrian painter fans in the political right that these leftoids that worship them actually, that they hate in terms of like their contemporary Western political rivals. These Muslims are, more closely aligned in terms of their beliefs. When it comes to immigration, when it comes to their hatred towards, a lot of like imams and that, and you don't want to stray too far into the sort of counter jihad stuff of the 2000s, but a lot of the stuff that these imams say and these activists say that, they're probably using the political left as pawns. People like Mark Stein were kind of correct about that, but they don't like us either, put it that way. But I will say though, it is true that a lot of the animus in the Muslim world against the West is because of that one particular nation in the Middle East that they code as basically a European-originated invader, colonialist, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't really motivate a lot of these economic migrants that have come to Europe since the 2000s. So it's like, are a lot of these migrants, like you see these French protests with hundreds of thousands of them, do they like fundamentally hate European, white people and Europeans? Yeah, probably. Do they hate European civilization? Probably. Do they have a racial animus against us? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, can you still navigate that with lamenting the injustices done to the Palestinians? And the fact that by kicking them out, we'll just create more migrants for Europe. Because those Arab countries, they certainly don't want them either, right? But I feel like and I've talked about the political factions the first half of this, I feel like people are just talking past each other, really. And then they have to like reify their positions to score points against that other, e-daddy that I hate, right? Because you're insulting my e-daddy. I have to go against you. It's like, come on, right? We can all agree with a reasonable position. Now, do some people go a bit too far with the whole like third worldism, or at least like what would you say, the Duganist, borderline Duganist assumption of like these people are wholesome Chungist traditionalists? Yeah, probably, right? I mean, does even Thomas 77 go a bit too far? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, they do have a point, right? When it comes to the barbarity that these people have faced. And the fact that they're collectively held as responsible, right? But that doesn't mean that, we have to bring them in for whatever reason because they're our wholesome Chungist political equivalent. And the leftoids, they have this as well. They have a very powerful form of exoticism and third worldism, where they're like, just like that cartoon I described. They truly believe that people in the Muslim world are just like them, and they're just as intersected. It's like, come on, be real for a moment. And of course they have this thing where they have to excuse the the actual politics, the traditionalist moralism of the Islamic world, right? They have to excuse that, or they have to play it off, or they have to be like, well, that's not real, or it's like only real in part. And then of course a lot of the neocons who are very pro that nation in the Middle East, they do this thing where they're like, oh, see, the left are hypocrites because you can't be a gay person or a trans person in Gaza. That's why you gotta support our greatest ally, which I will not, I'm still paranoid about naming on YouTube. But it's like, it's ridiculous. But it's like, okay, first of all, the left will never care about hypocrisy. And second of all, it's not hypocrisy to them. They literally construct this narrative of reality. But anyways, I wanted to not talk about the drama because I feel that there's a very sensible right-wing position here. And that doesn't have to rely on like third worldism or even like moralism towards human rights, but just the pure brutal fact of who has more influence over our foreign policy, right? Who has more influence over why these, I'm not going to get into it. You know about the people that man these NGOs that bring in the migrants. You know about this, right? I have to go into like a Paul-style rant about it. But there's a basis of reality in that. The fact that, when it comes down to it, there is a simple solution to the migrant crisis in Europe. It's you stop destabilizing these countries. You stop this particular nation in the Middle East whose foreign policy interest is that the region become destabilized, except for them, of course. You kick a lot of them, or I would say most of them out. I mean, I know that the reality is that, and listen, I know I'm probably going to be accused of cringe and coal and all that by more of the extreme forms of e-right discourse, but I think it's very hard to kick out someone who's already been here for generations and who's been integrated. You have to really, the most pragmatic solution is that all of these migrants that have come here in the 2000s, they have to go. I'm sorry. And I think that, it's funny because even Thomas 77 talked about this. So I'm not bashing. I'm a great admirer of his, but I don't admire everything he does. Of course, I don't admire, even some of the symbols that he wears, right? But I'm just saying, like, in terms of his actual thoughts, I think he even said this, where he's like, the reality is that you're gonna have to create some form of economic zone, not like explicit colonialism, although who knows, maybe that would be the last resort if like Based World could administer these, like, imagine if the empire was an unironic empire. What would that look like, right? Maybe it wouldn't be good, but the point is that you have to basically create incentives for these people to not come to Europe again and in North America. You have to and a lot of this is by just not destabilizing them. Will a lot of them live in poverty? Yes. But at the same time, I mean, when it comes down to it, as much as I like to be, let's all get along and friendly, a lot of times we're dealing with forces of history. We're dealing with the fact that there is a huge problem with culture, with demographics, with society, with civilization itself in the West. And sometimes you have to harden your heart to pity, I think, sometimes. Really. I mean, it's necessary. And I say this with knowing that pragmatically it's probably not likely that you're going to kick out people who have been in the, like, for example, there's Muslims, there's Indians that have been in Britain for a very long time. Those people are not going to go back because, frankly, what are they going to go back to, right? But from the migrant crisis onwards, it's very simple. And stop the bleeding. Really, stop the bleeding. It's simple. I mean, it's not really that simple, but politically it should be simple. You are facing huge problems. But that being said, that does not mean that you shouldn't have at least a humanitarian impulse when it comes to the systemic reasons as to why these people are migrants. Now, let's face it, there's a lot of agency in terms of groups that want to bring these people in because they think that, this is paying for the sins of colonialism, evil whitey, whatever. That's, but I'm saying, ideally, it should be clear. But that shouldn't sort of close yourself off to saying that, well, there is this other powerful entity in the Middle East that's sort of dictating things. And this is what leads to this Lee Fang tweet that I wanted to read. But my point being is that there should be a pragmatic solution to all of this in terms of the ideological framework of what you should place in terms of what is valuable on, the e-right or in any sort of rightist opinion that doesn't devolve into cartoonishly evil type of, discourse. So yeah, this is, by the way, that cartoon was by some guy named Comrade Cisco. Of course, it's got to have a Star Trek thing, right? But anyways, so this is and Li Fang is a great writer. I think Default interviewed him, but I would like to interview him one day too. But what's funny is because I wanted to bring this up because it illustrates the difference between the sort of social and political emergencies that happened for the previous, I would say, 5 years now, and what has been happening thus far in terms of the way that these moral panics manifest from the Cvidian era to other things. You could, and in my book, I talked about how like Coney 2012 is like the model of this and other things. So, this is by Li Fang, and I'm just pulling up my notes here. And to preface this, there is some things that I do disagree with him here, but I will explain why. That I think he's trying to say something specific, but it's not really translating. I'll tell you why. So here he says, the quote-unquote current thing is blind support for the nation in the Middle East's military. I'll call them IS, the IS military, the IDF. Just like before, it was blind support for BLM or whatever Fauci said. Fauci. And anyone dissenting will be censored, deplatformed, stigmatized as hateful or dangerous, liable to losing access to bank accounts and jobs. And of course, there are people arguing the other way, saying, no, that's not true. There's mass support for the Palestinians and so forth. But here's what I think that he's trying to say, but I would describe it as something different. Now, unlike, let's say, the current thing of the Summer of Floyd with BLM, or even like BLM, before that with, Saint Skittles, Trayvon, and Michael Brown, the Gentle Giant. You might be Mike Brown. That was a great Sam. He cleared those hipsters out of that Boston nightclub bar. But, the difference between that and the Cvidian era is that there is a form of elite support that is masked as a weird, perverse left-wing populism. Left-wing populism is essentially a moral panic. It's essentially a secularization of the moral majority of people that they still think exists and they hate, right? It's a moral panic that manifests itself as a scapegoat ritual. I know people don't like it, but Jeffrey Schollenberger went into this on Justin Murphy's Other Life podcast with the Cvidian thing, is that it's a Girardian panic scenario. That is the closest thing you could come up with in terms of left-wing populism, because the old forms of left-wing populism are dead. Labor politics, dead, okay? It's never coming back. In Canada, in Britain, even in America, the labor movement, never coming back. So, there you go. So the closest thing to left-wing populism is essentially a moral panic, a Girardian madness, put it that way, where the scapegoat is an individual person that takes on the form of a contagion that must be rooted out. That's essentially what it is. Now, you could say that when it comes to contemporary leftist politics, this is the difference with this issue, the conflict in the Middle East, is that the leftists, they pull towards Palestinians, obviously. It's been a long-standing thing about post-colonial liberation movements. The Palestinians are brothers, even the North Irish, the Palestinians, all that stuff, right? And even like Vaush, who, that's reliable CIA opinion right there. He said this thing I mentioned before on Digital Archipelago, where he's like, well, it seems that IS, this country in the Middle East, that they're in control. Even though they're weak, though, they have no real power. And the neo-Austrian painters are going to make hay out of this, right? But there's something to this. But he's wrong, because they actually do have power over the foreign policy of the Western world. So, and other things too. But anyways, the point being is that it's an objective fact that there is a difference between elite opinion now and what you would say are the political template of the Girardian madness that we call the current thing. Whether it's extreme Russophobia and Slavophobia, because of course which is really funny how the left invokes race science when, the liberal left invokes race science when they need to, where the Russians are, mixed mongrel orcs, and the Ukrainians, they're pure white Europeans. And it's like, it's incredible, right? It's incredible. And it's funny because the Girardian madness is even against the Russians, that there is a moral panic, that it's fascistic and transphobic and homophobic, whatever. It's all of the things that are evil, that are spreading like a mimetic contagion of like the Russian disinformation crap, right? And during the Civitian era, that is how public health was conducted. It is elite opinion in the guise of a populist moral panic in a Girardian scapegoating play. Girard has this thing called double mimesis, right? Or a mimetic chain, where you imitate the imitation of the other and vice versa. That is also interplaying with what happened during, the lockdowns, and during the, and even like with last year with hating the Russians, and, before that with the Summer of Floyd, the Summer of Love. But the difference, though, and this is a crucial difference that Li Fang is correct on, is that there is a split now, unlike before. There's a split between elite opinion and what is the current thing happening opinion, which is very interesting. Because leftist elites, of course they want to go with Palestine. And some of them have to begrudgingly bow down to the neocons and bend the knee towards this nation in the Middle East. Because the elite opinion is that this nation in the Middle East has to get whatever they want, and we're deploying American troop carriers, and there's special forces there to assist them. And it's a very, very strange dichotomy. Even like left liberal, radical liberal elites, like Justin Trudeau, has to go along with it. Because I expected his first impulse was going to be to side with the Palestinians. Which, I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't have a problem with. But of course I have a problem with to the extent that the leftists use it as like an anti-white cudgel, of course, right? But in terms of like the actual disparity between this nation in the Middle East and their military power and their ability to dictate foreign policy of the West as opposed to the Palestinians, I mean, come on, right? And even the death toll is like wildly, wildly out of proportion. And the argument that people like Ben Shapiro and other neocons like Sebastian Gorka or whoever, they make is like, oh, well, you can't expect proportionality when a nation's being attacked. Which traditionally, I would say, yeah, of course. If someone is attacking you and redacting civilians, then fine. But this is different. I mean, it's even different than Russia and Ukraine. Because, yeah, I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine. That is true. And we can argue that, these people in the East, they are threatened. They have been bombed for 8 years. They speak Russian. They identify with Russian culture. I mean, it's debatable, but at the same time, it's the truth. Russia has expansionist goals in Ukraine for a reason. And yes, they were goaded by the West, whatever. But the reality is that, yeah, of course, I do not expect the Ukrainians to take it lying down. Of course. They believe that they're fighting for their nation and, not excusing the atrocities that certain battalions have conducted in Ukraine that is then, buried in the Western media. I think that, the majority of the Ukrainian people that are fighting they believe they're fighting for their homeland. And of course, that's an admirable thing. Even though I think that one side has more of an argument than the other, and I think it's a tragedy that Ukrainian Christians are being used as pawns by the Western world that hates them or is cruelly indifferent to their suffering and their faith and who they are as a people in all of their forms. I think that's a tragedy. But this is different. This like an argument about like, well, what about the sovereignty when you're being attacked? Because not to say that I condone the attacks on, this ally nation in the Middle East, quote unquote, ally. I don't conduct the actions of Hamas or anybody of course, this goes without saying, right? But at the same time, this is a political crisis that has directly been caused by them, by forcing them into an open air ghetto, by even stealing their land to begin with. And I mean, I'm not going to go into it. Okay, the whole claim about why this nation at least was founded and if the claim is legitimate or not. I'm not going to get into that debate. The point being is that, since 2014 onwards, the fact that they control all of the resources, it's like, you can't say that it's not even comparable to like when, to 9/11 or whatever. Like it's not a pure, a foreign rival nation is attacking unprovoked this wholesome Chungus nation that just wants to live in peace because it's the nation for a particular people. Like, no, that's not the narrative by neocons like Ben Shapiro and Sebastian Gorka and the majority of the GOP who is obsessed with this nation at least. That is a spurious narrative, and I'm sorry that it's not the truth. It's you don't have, and listen, you don't have to like Muslims. You don't have to like Palestine. You don't have to like the protests in favor of them by leftoids that hate you. But I'm saying that this is the reality of it. This is and you could say that, well, they're close to Europeans. It's like, no, they're not. No, I'm sorry. Okay. Because we live in such a secular, post-Christian state, we can't comprehend like the ancient rivalries of these different peoples. We can't, it's almost like a lot of Westerners cannot realize that level of very ancient hatred, right? And that's the thing. That doesn't mean that I'm like I'm not Rene Gunyan. I'm not gonna convert to Islam, okay? I'm sorry. But I'm just saying that when it comes to the causes of this, without excusing the very barbaric actions of Hamas, there's no pure victim of this nation in the Middle East, why they have to respond so disproportionately, where they're bombing hospitals, they're redacting civilians, most of them are children, they're preventing them from leaving, they're cutting off their resources. It's like, oh, why would you give them food and water and electricity? It's like, well, because you've kept them in a state of perpetual humanitarian crisis to begin with. I mean, come on. I don't have to be like a post-colonial theorist. I don't have to read I don't have to agree with Franz Fanon on this issue, you know what I mean, just to see the reality of it. Because the fact is that the elite opinion, and this is the point I was trying to make by bringing up this Li Fang tweet, is that it is a very rare disconnect between the current moral panic of supporting the Palestinians and what is ostensibly universal Western elite opinion, which is that we must support, and to a degree, because there has been cases where even the Americans are telling the IDF to cool it, that you can't just go in and indiscriminately redact everybody, that you have to like go in surgically. I mean, will they be listened to? No. Has this particular nation in the Middle East basically lied to people and has even lied to their American backers to the extent to which they've committed crimes? Of course. And this has been documented, right? And it has been documented by left-wing organizations. Yeah, of course. But I think that the political dichotomy is very much a 2000s neocon dichotomy that was forced upon the American right wing and the Canadian right wing, the Anglosphere right, put it that way. The dichotomy between, these, that nation in the Middle East, that they're on the political right, and these leftoids, they hate you, they're pro-Muslim, the alliance between radical Islam and the left, it's like whatever. That, I think, is a false dichotomy that the right wing should avoid. But at the same time, you shouldn't go to the other dichotomy, which is we have to hate these people at all costs because now we're going to support Muslims and we're in favor of immigration. No, of course. That's stupid. And even people that were floating that have sort of retracted themselves. And they're like, well, actually, the migrant crisis in Europe is pretty real. But that being said, this disconnect is quite interesting. And this is why there is an immense political confusion. Because on the ground, in terms of these, non-governmental organizations, these UN organizations, these activists, these NGOs. Now, I will say that there has been NAFO people and Antifa people who actually have come out in support of the greatest ally. But, it's quite funny, actually. But the point being is that, because Ukraine is obviously aligned with them. Because, Netanyahu and Putin has, they've had a falling out. Ironically enough, though, Russia and Brazil, they're the only two people that are able to talk to every party involved except for America, while Brazil can talk to America. Because, Lula really stabbed his own people in the back, his revolutionaries in the back, by going along with the neoliberals and Biden, right? So, but it's funny because they're the only ones that are proposing peace. The Chinese even are proposing peace. This is a massive, massive L for the West in terms of optics. Now, will it do anything? Probably not. Because here's the problem with the third worldists that are sort of aligned with the political right, who are like very pro-Russia, who are almost like Duginists, right? Is that it's not going to fundamentally change. And this is something that Nicola Salo has said, which, I mean, he's a doomer, whatever. I disagree with him somewhat, but I think that he does have a lot of brilliant insights. And one of them is that it doesn't matter if there is a dichotomy between elite opinion and the opinion of a form of left-wing grassroots activist current thingism. Is that elite support will determine that this nation, the greatest ally in the Middle East, has to be supported no matter what. And there's no getting around that. And in terms of material power, it doesn't matter. Even people in the media disagree with it. But still, the narrative will be we have to help them out. They're one of us, and that's it. And that's the problem. Is that, a lot of the third worldists who ostensibly are kind of on the political right, but kind of not, Dugin will go on these long rants about anti-racism and all this crap. They have this like fantasy that, well, all of a sudden the empire will crumble if all of the wholesome Chungus third world nations get together. I mean, well, when it comes to the threat of China, maybe. But when it comes down to it, it's like, oh, see the Palestinians and the IDF, they're fighting. And this is really going to make a blow of the legitimacy of the empire. No, it will, optically, it will create a blow in the legitimacy of the empire. But when it comes down to the real world politique, they almost do not need that base of grassroots activism and current thingism. Because the elite opinion is that we must support this nation in the Middle East over everyone else, even if it risks World War III. And here's the thing, Iran may not get involved, Turkey might not get involved. Maybe nothing might happen. Unless they really push on Palestine, they really try to redact them. Even then, I think the trepidation and the antipathy over what would happen if Lebanon, Iran, and more importantly, Iran and Turkey gets involved. I think the trepidation over that would mean that the Americans would have to go in. And of course, the American military is not as powerful as it was during the surge, during Operation Iraqi Freedom, but it's scary, right? But I think it's probably less scary but then that's the tragedy of it. Because our greatest ally, they don't care. They don't care, okay, but these other Arab nations, they don't want the Palestinians. And so they're like, you know what? Go to Europe, go to America. We don't care. Like the utter hubris of that. And the fact that I'm just getting angry. I shouldn't really, because I'll say something stupid. But these boomer cons in America that, vote GOP. And a lot of them are good people, and a lot of them have been lied to over the years. But they don't realize that, I don't care what Sean Hannity says to you. I don't care what, the Five or whatever. I forget the shows. I haven't watched Fox since Tucker left, right? I don't care what Fox News says to you, okay? These people are not your friends. They don't have your best interests at heart. At best, you're just a useful idiot to fund their expansionism. And the fact that they don't care if in America and in Europe that these people get displaced and they're the ones who are going to go, to these places because the other Arab nations don't want them. And rightfully so. What the reason I say this is because the Egyptian argument, the Jordanian argument is that why would we do the job of this particular nation in the Middle East for them? Because if they allow the Palestinians to go into Sinai and to go into places of Jordan or in or to go in other places in the Middle East, that it would like the optics hit of that is crazy, because it means that they would be participating in the removal of an Arab population. And they would basically allow this nation in the Middle East to have, their expansionist goals be unchallenged. Then they would take all the West Bank, all the Golan Heights. It's like, it never ends. And so they're like, why would we want to and even if it means the humanitarian crisis of not letting them go into a safe space, and there's been reports that they've bombed the roads of refugees trying to get out into Egypt, when they've let them through these humanitarian corridors. They're like, well, we want to help these people, but by letting them leave all at once en masse, that's basically negating the whole point of them staying in their land, right? And they would have another scrap of land stolen from them. Right. And yeah, so I think that the Jordanians and the Egyptians, especially, their hands are tied. Right. They want to have good relations because, of course, America dictates that they must have good relations with these people in this nation in the Middle East. And it's like it's an impossible situation. And it's like, if you've seen the footage and the fact that, hospitals are going offline, these people are malnourished to begin with, it's tragic, but anyways, I just wanted to talk about this dichotomy between elite opinion and the current thing. And I think that we're starting to see a divergence when it comes to very complicated geopolitical issues, that they really don't need the Girardian madness of current thingism in terms of leftward populist scapegoating, that they'll just proceed otherwise. And maybe, who knows, maybe they can, I don't think this will ever happen, but maybe if they can psyop the average leftoid into supporting our ally, quote unquote, maybe they'll do it by saying, well, those evil Austrian painter fans, they also hate those people. And it's like, I don't know, maybe if things get hot enough in the Middle East, maybe they'll try to do like a leftoid version of the GOWAD, Global War on Terror, where they'll do like a leftoid version of counter jihad, where it'll be like, well, they don't have gay marriage there, so they're evil. Maybe they'll do that. You'll never know, right? Because these people are ultimately malleable. That's at the end of the day. But and there's a lot of people in the political right that are malleable. But I'm just saying that it is a very interesting dichotomy that I think Li Fang wasn't really explicating. But it was a great tweet nevertheless, because to go against openly, to go, especially in positions of power, to go against the geopolitical aims and security, border stability of this greatest ally nation in the Middle East, you will get canceled. You will get fired. You will be called an anti-what. And it's disgusting. So this is the only instance where the majority of the left-wing opinion in Cthulhu, swing left, the majority of the leftist opinion is not at the heart of what elite opinion is. Even leftist elites have to begrudgingly go along with it, right? I'm sure Macron, why did I say Sarkozy? I'm sure Macron and Justin Trudeau and maybe other more leftist European leaders I'm sure like they're like, we don't really want to go along with this, because we got to worry about the migrant populations in our countries that we've let in through our glorious neoliberal one worldism, right? But I'm sure that they're like gritting their teeth. But the immediate instinct is to be like, well, they got to defend themselves. Even Justin Trudeau tweeted it out like immediately afterwards. Oh, they have to defend themselves. It's like, that's incredible, because Justin Trudeau would be the prime candidate for like going there with the Palestinian flag and wearing the scarf that they wear. I forget what it's called. The scarf, the black and white one, the stripes, the black stripes. It's like, that was a very popular trope with the critics of globalization, old school 90s left-wing opinion, 80s and 90s left-wing opinion. They always used to wear that scarf, right? It's just like, it's incredible to witness. But anyways, I've talked far enough. Thank you all. And in the paywalled version, right after this break, go to Patreon and Substack. I'm going to talk about the film 8mm. It's going to be amazing. Oh, and at the time of recording this, or rather the time of at release, I hope everyone had a great Halloween. I like Halloween. I'm not the biggest fan of Halloween like a lot of people, but I hope you had a good one. And I think maybe 8mm might be an appropriate post-Halloween movie to talk about, because then we're going to get into Christmas mode. I know you Americans have Thanksgiving, but, well, I mean, maybe I'll have to celebrate Thanksgiving this year, who knows? Because it seems like, Thanksgiving's disappeared in Canada. But anyways, yeah, thank you. God bless, goodbye. Go to the Patreon version. Go to the Substack version. It'll be the full and also, downloadable audio for, the full and the paid versions. You can switch over at any time. Only $5 a month for both. With, $20 and $50 tiers, you get works of art, which I have to actually work on. I've been busy with the book writing, but, I've been neglecting my artwork, which I'm very ashamed of. But, anyways, thank you. Let's go over to the reviewing 8mm. Thank you for listening to the Content Minded podcast, where every Wednesday there are interesting guests, amazing ideas, solo streams, and discussions on a diverse array of topics from art, philosophy, history, and more. The free version will be available both here on YouTube and as a downloadable link on Anchor and Spotify, as well as on Substack. Each week, the full, uncensored, and spicier version will now be available on both Patreon and Substack, where you will have access to the full archive of both Content Minded and of Giant Reviews, where I break down interesting texts every week, including other exciting paywalled articles and good content. Thank you all. Please like, share, and subscribe. God bless. Goodbye. Help keep the content renaissance alive. Too sweet.